In the YouTube wildlife community, cheetahs are kind of a punchline. They have dull claws, sound like a bird, get their food stolen by birds, and of course, they're a lion's perpetual chew toy. Their design has no chance of ever competing. They are low-tier trash. But I don't think cheetahs are really all that bad. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why, and hopefully change the narrative. First, let's go over the history of the cheetah. They first appeared around 4 million years ago, and the original ones were actually more thickly built, still clearly designed for speed, but a much more respectable size. These cheetahs existed throughout Eurasia and Africa, and even dipped their toes into North America. And all throughout that time, they were alongside things like cave lions, gigantic bears, and saber-toothed cats. So they weren't strangers to competition. In fact, throughout all of that, it ended up being this thinner build that we know today that ended up being the best one. And if they could handle all of that back then, modern competition should be a bit of a cakewalk. In fact, I'll contend that the entire competition thing has been massively overstated, especially when it comes to lions. Normal cheetah prey is things like springboks, steenboks, duikers, gazelles, things that typically don't even reach 100 pounds. Meanwhile, lions are hunting wildebeest, zebra, Cape buffalo, and even the occasional giraffe. You might have noticed there's basically no overlap there. Even the smallest of the lion's prey is still 5 feet tall and about 500 pounds. So lion prey is well above the range that cheetahs would go for. Meanwhile, springbok and gazelle are just way too fast and agile for a lion to realistically keep pace with. They have different prey, which means different niches, and so they're not actually competing in the first place. Yes, the lion will still take its opportunities to attack any cheetah it sees, but knocking a cheetah for not being able to stand its ground against one of nature's greatest apex predators is like pointing out that a rabbit would get bodied by a moose. It is objectively true, but it also objectively doesn't matter. Also, both caracals and servals get folded by lions just as badly as cheetahs, but nobody's given them any crap for it. And cheetahs have another major advantage over lions anyway. They're better hunters. Scientists were curious about the success rate of various predators in Africa, and after studying them for a while, they found that cheetahs would succeed about 50% of the time. Meanwhile, the lions, even with their pride, were only pulling 35%. And if they were alone, that number would drop to just 15 to 20. Meanwhile, an animal they actually compete with, the African wild dog, has an utterly insane 80% success rate. But we'll get to those guys later. Another animal they compete with, the leopard, was much closer at 45%. And you would think that would kind of be curtains on my attempt to stick up for the cheetah. After all, the dogs are way better at hunting, and the leopards are basically just as good, and can actually protect their kill by taking it up into a tree. But even over these guys, the cheetah has its own advantages. Starting with leopards, their advantage is effective distance. Every single chase starts from some point of cover. And around that area of cover, a predator has a distance where it can expect to catch any prey that's within that range. Outside of it, they can expect to fail. Leopards are ambush predators who can only really hit 37 miles an hour. That's enough to make a fool of Usain Bolt, but with Springboks hitting 55, it's not gonna cut it for long. As a result, their effective distance is kind of small. Now, in places with lots of cover, it doesn't really matter. All of the effective ranges overlap, and there's no safe path through. However, in areas of sparse cover, it's easy for the prey to avoid the danger zones because the leopard can't get an overlap. And these prey species have had millions of years of evolution behind them. They know that cover is an area of danger, and they'll know to avoid it. So they will take these safe paths. Meanwhile, the cheetah is actually built for chasing things, so its effective distance is much longer. In crowded areas, that doesn't really matter. It would have had an overlap regardless. But in the sparse areas, this increase in distance helps them cut off the paths and make it so that nowhere is actually safe. So while the hunting success rate for cheetahs and leopards is close overall, when you put them in a wide open area, the numbers swing drastically in favor of the cheetah. But African wild dogs are endurance hunters. So not only are they going to match the cheetah's effective distance, they're going to vastly exceed it. The cheetah's advantage over them, though, is food requirements. The African wild dog lives in large packs, and as a result, there's a lot of bellies to fill, and that requires a lot of food. And their hunting strategy that makes them so effective relies on them having a large amount of numbers, so they can't actually cut back. So if an area simply doesn't have enough prey for them to survive off of, no matter how good they are at hunting, they just won't survive there. Meanwhile, cheetahs can form coalitions, and they do, but they don't really have to. So they can get by on less food and live in these places that the wild dog can't. In fact, if you look at their historic range, you'll notice that a lot of it happens to be in extremely sparse areas. And that actually bodes pretty well for the cheetah's future, because Africa is currently drying out. So those dry areas are just becoming all the more common. So despite other issues like human encroachment and low genetic diversity, I think the cheetah is actually pretty well set up for the future. These cheetahs existed throughout Eurasia and Africa, which means different niche. The African wild dog has a leopard from some point of cover.